Good evening and welcome to Smoking Issues. My name's Ian.
And I'm Josh. And that's you.
And I'm Lisa Ann.
Lisa, is this your first time broadcasting live, I wonder?
Thought y'all were going to say more.
We keep it simple around here. So, Ian, tell us where you are, man.
Where am I? I am in England. I am in a small village near to London called Bennett's End.
Village.
Bennett's End? I feel like there's a joke in there somewhere.
It's only a joke if you really know anything about London suburbia and the various denigrated pockets of it.
Okay, all right. Well, we are in the countryside here in Dayton, Tennessee.
Dayton, Tennessee.
So tell us a little bit about where we are, Lisa Ann.
Well, we're actually sitting at my brother's house. But no, Dayton, Tennessee is a nice little small town in East Tennessee. And it's famous for the Scopes monkey trial from the 1920s.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's just a nice little small town.
Yeah, good.
It's legit. So I'm going to post a picture on Smoking Issues on our Facebook page. It's like this beautiful, cute little cottagey screened-in porch. That's like literally heaven for cigar smokers.
I'm so jealous of you.
Cigars have been smoked here.
And hopefully 2 more will be smoked by the end of the podcast.
Yes.
All right. So we are doing our first live transcontinental podcast. Ian, how does it...
Podcast?
What? What?
You just choked. You went, podcast?
Podcast? Oh, by golly, everybody. Hi. Oh.
Yeah, live transcontinental. We have 1 viewer thus far. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Josh. And
Hi, Josh.
We've got Ian. You've got live people where you are right now. Is that the deal?
I do. I have live human beings who are sitting in this room with me.
It's kind of a little weird, isn't it?
It is weird. It's like it's not what it's like to record a radio show.
Yeah, it must be. Well, Rachel is actually sitting on the other side of the couches. She just waved, but no one can see it.
Okay.
So we both have live viewers, and this is also our first time that we've ever had a live guest on the podcast. So
yeah,
we're making history. And when you make it famous, you can have us to thank for, maybe, or not.
Thanks, guys.
And Lisa Ann comes to us with today's issue.
All right. So tell us, what are we talking about today?
Well, you and I discussed for a little while some different issues, and one that came out, which I thought was pertinent to the church, and especially where we are today with the church, which is basically how the church views singleness in its body.
Okay.
We're going to talk about that today.
Great. And what are you guys smoking today?
So we are doing Macanudos. Put your Macanudo up by the thing so everybody can see live. I'm going to share the picture now of where we are. But we're smoking Macanudo cafes. So Macanudo cafes are like the poor man's Macanudo because we're poor, and we can't afford massively wildly popular sticks. But a couple interesting things. So we're doing a 5.5 by 42 inch Corona. It's part of the Cafe family. So this is actually one of the lightest cigars that Macanudo makes. And it's got a Connecticut shade wrapper. Ian, you and I are familiar with this. And it smells wonderful, actually.
It does smell really good.
There you go. Light it up.
Oh, here, I'll let you light it for me.
You want me to light it for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't smoke these very often, so I'm not exactly a expert on it.
Well, whilst you're lighting that, let me tell you what I'm smoking today.
Yes.
Because England is a tolerant and liberal place, we can still buy Cuban cigars. So today I'm smoking a punch. Habana, Cuba.
Yes. Nice.
I hate you so much right now. You don't even know.
Yeah, and so that's today's cigar. So quite excited. It smells good.
I hate you so much. So we were talking about when Lisa Ann moved back to Tennessee, having Lisa Ann come on, and we try to be really defined on smoking issues and not like just have these major broad topics. So we're going to narrow it down a little bit today. And Lisa, and you and I are talking in the car on the way over here about how we're going to narrow it down.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about was, again, how the church speaks, the rhetoric surrounding singleness, how the community, the body of the church, talks to and about singleness. But we also wanted to, I think, be very careful that there is a lot of various types of singleness. There's clearly those that have never been married, but there's also been those that have been divorced and those that have been widowed. And those are all various forms of singleness that we want to be sensitive to, and I think the church needs to be sensitive to. But overall, again, like I said, the kind of the rhetoric that the church as a whole uses when describing a single person and their value, as well as what we say to one another. Yeah. Is really important.
Yeah, so we were initially when Lisa and I were talking, initially we were going to do gender. And we're going to talk gender and leadership in the church. But when we're kind of saving this issue, Ian, you and I have brought this up many times.
Yeah.
As Lisa and I were talking, there's this whole idea of singleness too that just really seems to the church has a weird view of single people. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So maybe before we jump in, Ian, if it's okay, because everybody knows us here, maybe Lisa Ann, you can just share like 30 seconds about who you are, what you do. Why the heck are you in Dayton, Tennessee?
I know. Well, obviously, I know you guys from living in Annapolis for a long time. And then just a couple months ago, I'm from Tennessee originally. And so my family's here. As I said, we're at my brother's house. And so I just felt the Lord wanted me to move back to Tennessee. And I didn't do it with a super willing heart, I will say, at times, being that I love Annapolis. But I moved back a couple of months ago, and so now I'm just kind of figuring out what this is all going to look like being back in Tennessee. But it's been great being here, being close to family so far. But I miss my church. I miss my community in Annapolis. So there's been some adjusting, obviously, being back here, and also being right now currently in a more rural Bible Belt culture. And so that has been unique, being back here, experiencing that and realizing kind of, again, the topic of singleness that we're talking about today, how even that regionally where you are located, kind of the history of where you live, how that also impacts the conversation around singleness. And again, how the church treats singleness and views singleness.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so yeah, a little bit about where I am.
Yeah. So Ian, I thought I'm going to be more of moderator than I am speaking in too much because, I'm married, so I don't have the same experience, but obviously you do as well, being a single pastor in the church as well.
Right. So, I appreciate your your graciousness in letting us have this conversation. I'm sure as a married person, you look back on your single days with fear and suspicion and hatred and anger, resentment, frustration. So glad to be out of that terrible state in life where you are so alone.
Yes. And now I experience the marital bliss where there's no problems, there's no fights, there's no issues. It's really just like
Rachel is laughing.
And as my wife is maniacally laughing on the other side of the camera right now. Because guys, don't you know that you're not really a true Christian or a leader unless you're married and unless you're popping out babies like there's no tomorrow.
Of course. It shows your virility, doesn't it? And your competency as human beings.
Shows why man and woman were created, to procreate.
Yeah.
Right, obviously, nothing else.
Virility, it's just weird. Ugh. Why do you use that word? You're so weird.
Oh, let me say it in more English. Virility.
Oh, it's so creepy.
There you go. You're welcome.
Oh my gosh. So Lisa Ann just defined singleness, and by the way, she put together the whole outline, which is awesome. Like Lisa, you think like in an outline, which I love. I think it's great. So Lisa put together this outline at kind of our request, just to help us understand a little bit more about where we're coming from. So what's kind of the prevailing mentality and rhetoric about single people in the church? And that's kind of my first question for you guys. What is it like to be single in the church?
Well, when you're young, the language surrounding singleness in the church is always and without fail, have you found a partner? How's it going with your prospective partner? How can we help you find your partner?
Yep.
That's awful.
Yep.
Yep.
And young people's groups within the church are often thinly veiled dating agencies.
It's a meat market.
I wasn't going to say meat market. That makes it sound like really pretty cruel and but
That's an Americanism there for you, but that would definitely be how a lot of people I know would describe those single Sunday school classes, single small groups, single gatherings, anything, any way you want to label it. At the end of the day, a lot of people would say, oh, it's a meat market.
Great. That is truly grotesque. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now I'm trying to think are the jocks like raw hams that are just like hanging from meat hooks? I mean, we can, my wife is over there saying, no, don't keep this conversation going.
No. Moving on.
We can take this so far. There's so much here. It's almost a shame to leave it, but we have to.
Yes. No, I mean, I agree. I think with Ian, especially when you're young, it's the conversation about, well, let's get you out there. Let's find you a husband. Let's do this. And it doesn't change a lot, except as you get older, except that the questions change slightly to include ones of, why are you not married? Are you too picky?
Right.
And the likes in that vein are more what you get. Or I don't want to hear you. I actually have a friend that was asked this or told this by some of her friends and said in the church, said, I don't want to hear you talk about singleness until you've dated every single man in this church. I was like, what?
Wow. Okay. That's
so cool. It's also, I think, the prevailing idea that I have tended to get, and particularly I think being back here again in a more small town community, again in the Bible Belt of America, but is that we single people, we are not whole until we're married, and that so much emphasis and importance is put on marriage that they have lost complete sight of the value and also being single and what singleness brings to the body of Christ. And so that's something that always bothers me, and something that I would love to see changed. Considering too, I mean, as the church as a whole, there are more single people in the church today worldwide than there are married people.
Really?
Yep. There are also, just in general, more and more people in the world that are becoming or are single because we're living longer, so there's usually going to be a spouse that outlives another. There's a higher divorce rate, and then in terms of marriage, a lot of people are waiting longer and longer to get married.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Factor all that in, and you've got a lot more single people in the world, and thus in the church today. And I just think the church needs to figure out how they're communicating to those people and how they're sharing and showing that they're of great value to how the body operates. There's a strong need for that today.
Mm-hmm. And additionally, among some congregations, particularly where there's a gender disparity in a town, I'm thinking particularly of many English churches where women are more likely to be committed to the faith than men. Mm-hmm. Many women are reluctant to date or pair with men who are not of the faith, and so will prefer to remain single than date somebody who doesn't share their values.
Right.
That might not be quite so common in the US, but that certainly is fairly common here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that definitely overall there's a lot more single women in a church than single men. And then I would say too that, a lot of those women, obviously it's what I can speak to, those women are desiring, I mean, they desire to have a man who believes what they believe, who is going to share and grow in that same faith, because that's a huge part of their life, and it's the biggest part of their life. And therefore, if you can't have someone that's your companion in life and it doesn't share that same value, that same system, then it's going to cause you to be probably pretty lonely. And so, you know, I'm thankful that I know some really amazing women that are just not going to compromise on that. And if someone says that makes us too picky, then, well, gosh, I'm sorry, but that's just not something that I'm going to compromise on. And I know other women aren't going to compromise on. So I would say that that's true to a point here in the States as well, that women would rather not marry than have someone who's not sharing in their full life, the full life
right.
that they have.
One point just reminded us that that situation of people not dating outside their faith is only really common to evangelical Christians. Different Christian traditions have a different attitude, but it's like your, you know, kind of enthusiastic evangelicals who are unlikely to date outside of their faith tradition. Just a caveat there.
So I think there is some truth to that, but I would say I would have a lot of Catholic friends. I have Orthodox friends, and they would not date outside of theirs either.
Okay.
So I think there's some truth to that, but I think it's not totally exclusive to evangelicals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe there's a religious fervor that evangelicals have associated with that.
Yeah.
Maybe we hear that more from the pulpit. Maybe you think more so than maybe in a Catholic or Orthodox context. I'm just trying to think of where that comes from. Yeah. So maybe it's just more emphasized. You know, I can remember growing up in the Baptist church and hearing "Don't be unequally yoked."
Right.
Just beat over your head.
Yeah.
With a big King James Bible.
Yeah.
And can you describe for me what's meant by that term, unequally yoked?
You want to go for it? Since I'm
well,
sure you've heard it plenty, haven't you?
There's an example right there of a very common thing that's taught, I think, in church, that, you know, unequally yoked, meaning for some, I think what's meant is to have a partner who is of the same, you know, faith as yourself, in terms of loving Christ, seeking Christ, and believing in his death and resurrection. But I think it can be twisted sometimes to also say only within our denomination, only within our evangelical faith, or something of that nature is what I've also seen it kind of change to, where, I mean, I obviously, I come actually more from a Presbyterian upbringing than a strictly non-denominational evangelical faith. But I've heard it from all different, and I would never hesitate to date someone or to think and consider someone who was of other ideas on certain issues, as long as they held fast to the saving grace of Christ and what that means.
Okay.
So, but you can tell unequally yoked. How would you also describe
No,
that?
I think people will take that. I mean, it actually is in the context of more business, I believe. I don't remember the context. I need to look it up here in a minute. Maybe Josh, if you're listening, you can look up the context and send it to us. But you know, I think the idea is it's taken out of context. This is one of these ways that we talked about weaponizing scripture back in episode 9, where it's kind of taken to an nth degree that says, well, you can't date anyone who's not a Baptist.
Right.
Or because Methodists might or might not be going to heaven, you
Right.
know? Like so there's this like very like stringent Southern Baptist-y type context, and I'd imagine that there's some other ones as well. That's just what I know. That was like, well, if they're not Baptist, then everybody gives a little bit of a stank eye a little bit, and then what was that?
Is that okay?
Yeah, and then if they're not a Christian or they're not overtly involved in a church, people just consider that anathema. So they take this passage that's meant to be like, don't become in like some sort of intimate, close relationship with someone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's in the context of a business partnership. Just be careful. And they take this to an nth degree of like, if they're not a part of our denomination, then
Right.
ooh, you're
becomes
on
very
the edge.
closed in on the denomination. I mean, I know, for instance, there are people here in this community, Church of God and Church of Christ are large denominations. And I have friends in both, and one of which got married a couple of years ago, but she flat out told me she would never, ever, ever date nor marry someone that was not Church of God.
Okay.
So where do we, I think this might be good to explore this. Like, where does this come from? Like, what's the thing under the thing? Like, what's the teaching under the teaching? Or what's the fear there that we see with this idea of you can't date anyone
outside of your
this
denomination.
What's the fear?
I mean, I have to think that some of it is that, some of it is when you get down to just like, beyond the fundamentals of our faith, but you get into more just like small, even doctrinal issues that obviously different denominations differ on, different faiths differ on. But people hold so hard and so fast to some of those that it's a make it or break it for them. And there is no compromise. This is what God told me. This is what I believe. This is what the Bible says, even though another faith may say, or another denomination may say, well, actually, I interpret the scriptures this way based on this and this. And, but it's just getting to be very stuck, I think, on particular issues of doctrine that in the grand scheme of things actually aren't that important. But it's still holding fast. And if somebody is sitting in the pew and that's what their pastor is teaching and that's what they know and that's what they're believing and being taught, then they're going to hold to that too, I think.
Yeah.
I
don't know, Ian.
I would say it sounds more like fear of losing people.
There could be some of that.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting that you mentioned that. I just remembered a story of a guy he's a prototypical seminarian. He wore mom jeans, polo shirt buttoned all the way to the top. And so he would walk around, and so he started dating one of my friends, and they used to have legit conversations. Like he was like interviewing her about what she believed about predestination and like eschatology, and was she like a pre-mill or mill or post mill. Like I remember, like they had legit conversations about, and she ran as fast as she could, as she should have.
Yeah,
as she should have. Can you imagine sitting in the student lounge and seeing these two people dating, and he's like quizzing her on like, what do you believe about foreknowledge? Are you? When do you believe Jesus is returning, and in what way?
Yeah.
Like, how ridiculous is that? That's just nuts.
You should just be pleased they believe in Jesus, right?
What was that?
You should just be pleased they believe in Jesus.
Well, nowadays it's true, right? You believe in Jesus? This is awesome.
I know, it's great. Yeah, because I just know, I mean, people just get, again, so, they make whole careers of writing on one very small piece of doctrinal, theology, and they are so hardcore about it. And they, it's just, and same thing can be said for people that are teaching from, the front, and it gets filtered down. And unfortunately, like sometimes it can, like you said, be out of fear of losing people sitting out in those pews. Or it can just be just from hardcore, I think that there's, some genuineness that comes from some of it. I don't want to discount that people have a genuine heart behind it, but I don't think that it's necessarily helpful to the church body to teach in that way at all. So, but.
So you mentioned before, we were talking about this idea, you mentioned very briefly, said singleness can be seen as not being whole, but therefore something to fix.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that relate to being single and also being a leader within the church? Like, how does that affect how people view leadership if they have a fear that maybe there's something not whole about you? So we're talking about dating, so let's maybe move it back to like single people and leadership in the church and how that's viewed. And you have a unique, because you have very strong leadership gifts. and as well as Ian does.
Mhm.
And so like I'd be really fascinated to hear both of your perspectives on what does it look like to be a single leader within the church, one from a volunteer's point of view and one from a vocational point of view.
Ian, do you want to take that first?
Well, I think by the virtue of being white, middle class, and male, I am able to overcome the stigma of being single. It's not something that's hindered me, as far as I can tell, in any of the pathways I've pursued. What it does often mean, though, is that married folks and families are much more hesitant to connect with me or hang out with me.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. Sorry?
Why do you think that is?
I think it might be, when that life change happens and become married or have children, then you suddenly change your sort of social makeup, who you're hanging out with, where you're hanging out, and what you're doing. That there's this sort of belief that, oh, single people aren't interested in me or us or our life situation.
Can I follow up with a question? I'm curious too, because I know, I mean, you're 25, and so do you think that some of the view you said in ministry wise, that because they still consider you on the younger side of just kind of beginning a ministry, do you think that is part of why you don't feel some of that, or you just don't think it's at all?
Oh, undoubtedly. I imagine that if I continue to be single, that there would come a point where people would sort of like start to have like awkward and bigoted questions about that.
Yeah. I mean, I know what a female perspective, but I wouldn't know, obviously what kind of questions you get asked, but that sort of thing. Because I go along with what you said. I agree with what you said. I think it's actually quite similar to, I think, how a woman feels in the church and in leadership in the church. That that very often, I mean, one thing that I shared with Josh earlier was one of the impressions that I think women get and how we're treated sometimes is because we're single, there's a sense that obviously we're an independent person because we're functioning on our own.
How can you function as a single person, Lisanne? How can you?
I know.
It's amazing. How can you accomplish things in your life?
I know.
On your own,
without a man helping you.
It is remarkable. Lots of prayer. But we tend to be labeled as very independent, aggressive, strong-willed women, and not the ideal woman, which is humble and meek.
Okay.
And, therefore, that can be posed as, a threat, I think, in some ways. Also, I think Rachel actually in our conversation earlier made a really good point, and that sometimes the women in the church will also view a single woman as someone who's not willing to submit. Her place, that sort of thing. And so that has been something I've run up against in my life at times where it's definitely, well, you can serve right under a man. Like he'll lead, but you can support him. So you can lead, but you can do this. And that's where they find that to be the happy medium. Right.
You can be a body in the machine, but you can't like help shape or run the machine.
Right. So, that has been obviously very discouraging, hurtful throughout the years because, obviously I think we're all gifted in different ways and, we're meant to use our gift set. And so, to be told that or to be treated in such a way at times has been very hurtful.
That makes sense. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So what is that? What do you think that means for how the church now views? Because it seems like the core problem is how the church is viewing gender. At least with some of your context that you're talking about. It's woman's not submissive, or she's picky, or she doesn't fit the stereotypical model of a submissive mom of 5 kids that stays at home and drives a minivan. So like maybe there's some sort of fundamental issue with gender that we're dealing with. Because Ian, as you mentioned, it doesn't seem like that you're dealing with the same questions or issues as Lisanne is. So
no, but that could be because I've been quite discerning with the communities I've become involved with as well. That I am looking for a certain kind of professionalism and a certain kind of openness when I'm looking for church communities to become involved with. So I could have been protected from those kind of ignorant assumptions because of that reason as well. But to bring it back to gender, I think it has to be about gender at some point. That it seems to be a fact on the ground that it's more okay to be a single man than it is a single woman.
Oh, very much. It's not looked upon in the same way. It's more, I think it's more acceptable culturally, just overall culturally. Like it's more acceptable for a man to remain single for longer periods of time than a woman. Because then you get the questions of, well, what's wrong with her? Like, what's wrong with her? Or there was a book published not very long ago and it was a woman who wrote it. But basically, her premise to the entire book was if you have reached your late 20s or 30s and you are still unmarried, then it's your fault.
Wow.
And you need to go out there and do something about it. And I was like, a woman wrote this? Like, I mean, it was just like, how in the world, And so, I mean, people, I think, in the church have lost sight of the value that singleness can bring to a church body, and what that means. And that kind of goes into the same thing, like single women, that there's nothing wrong with a single woman. And I don't know why, but I would say that it's still culturally looked upon to be better for a man to be single longer than a woman. Right.
And I think it comes down to this idea that a single woman is somehow a threat, or is not able to accomplish things a married woman is able to accomplish, and then is therefore, I think, ostracized from being
there's been the conversation too, and I mentioned this earlier, which is that a woman can't know real love until she is a wife and a mother.
Okay, that's really dark. Can you say more about that?
Well, it's just, this has been comments that have been made to not to myself, thankfully, but to friends of mine, and basically other women, other mothers, wives, whatever, have actually said this to other women in their church, that, well, you won't really understand, this is how they would say it, you won't really understand this until you're married and a mother. You can't understand the love like that I feel for my child or for my husband until you are married. So it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, which was this idea that I am not whole until I'm married, because I can't even know now what real love, like deep love, is until I'm married.
Okay, and that is, in my opinion, pretty wicked.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I say this is an important topic, I think, because I think it's not just how the church speaks in that's what's coming from a pastor in the front of the church, but how the congregation in the body of Christ speaks to one another, because this is women speaking to women.
Right, and you expect better.
And exactly. And so, and they should be called out. They should be taught and told that this is not okay. And, and frankly, there's been a few things that have come out lately, which have been really nice, that women, mothers and wives have written, just because the blogging world obviously has blown up over the last 10 years. And just within the last couple of months, I've seen a few things that people have reposted about letters that mothers have written to single friends and said, thank you Thank you, because your friendship has meant so much to me. You have given me your time. You have watched my children. You have hung out with me. You have cried with me. You have done things that other married moms haven't done or haven't had the opportunity to do. Because granted, I mean, I think, as I say, when I say the gift of singleness, when I think of meaning gift, I mean, it's the freedom of time, because we have more time. We have more time to devote to our own relationship with God. And we have time to devote to the body of Christ. And so, you know, to discount or make a single person feel that they are less than is a very strong disservice to not just that one person, but to the whole of the body of Christ that is made up of a lot of single people. And all different types, as I mentioned before. Widowed and divorced are in there just as much as the never married persons as well.
Well, this goes back to maybe somebody's perspective of Christ then, because you think about Christ wasn't married,
right?
And
Paul
did not
was never
have
married,
and Paul was never married. So
hold the phone. Dan Brown, the fine historian and archaeologist, told us in an expose novel a few years ago that Jesus was probably married.
Oh,
what was that called, Ian?
The Da Vinci Code.
So you're wrong, Josh. You're wrong.
I must be wrong, because the guy that wrote a fictional book said something different, and then got Tom Hanks to play the dude too. Freaking Tom Hanks. Really, that's where all the problems in the church come back to. Is Tom Hanks. No, but like this idea of this union with Christ that happens when we become believers, or we unify with what Christ has done and embodied for us, right? Like we get to the chance to experience the fullness of God's glory and his grace because Christ experienced it for us and has allowed us to be joined with him. So I wonder if it's somewhat of I might be stretching a bit here, but I wonder if this is a bit of a Christological issue. This idea of maybe we don't have a good understanding of what it means to be unified with Christ if we think that certain people that don't have life experience can't experience true love, you know? Does that then mean Jesus wasn't able to?
Life experience or wife experience.
No, this is good. This is really good. Let's see here. A couple other questions. Well, so what does this look like then? Like when you're in leadership, like just this idea of how have you been leading? And I know at Downtown Hope, you led some pretty significant ministries. So what was some of the feedback, pushback, struggles, things that you were experiencing in the midst of that?
Well, I have to say, I mean, I was blessed with, wonderful people at Downtown Hope. I think the leadership there is very spot on with the values that women and single people bring. I think, there's room for improvement in terms of how the church speaks to one another there. But I would say that in terms of being allowed to use my leadership skills and gifts and to run certain things and take it away and to be deferred to even in terms of ideas and decision making was very just it meant the world to me as a woman and as someone who loves the Lord and wants to do things for him and be an active part of the church body. So I didn't have a lot of issues, I would say, at all in terms of the leadership of the church and my being put into some different roles, leading different things there. But I would say in past, like before that, like just being, growing up in a certain area and kind of having limited opportunities, limited choices in where I would engage in church, that is more where I felt some of what we've been talking about in terms of the leadership part. The singleness part, that permeates everywhere. But the, female leadership part would be, I think, more directed to probably previous times of growing up, and just knowing that I was not ever going to be allowed to lead something myself. And as I said before, like usually it would be a man, and then I would be a supportive role. So I'd help organize things, or I would help, make sure that we had food and coffee.
I was thinking organize the potluck, right?
Yeah. And it's like, because, that's what, we women, are really good at.
Because Lisanne, you don't have value unless you're helping people get fed, right?
Yeah.
So that's really your ministry's in the kitchen.
Right.
Oh
right.
gosh, you had to say it. You had to say it.
I know, I had to say it because it sounds so horrible. But people literally say that all the time in some form or another.
I mean, and I know that there are women that do love that role. That, so to not discount that there is great value and need for those people. And there are women that feel very comfortable and love filling that role. But to always relegate women to that role is difficult because we're all uniquely made and uniquely different and gifted, and not all of us want to be doing that. So, that I would say, so more again in the immediate, I've been really blessed to be with a really great group of people that have allowed me to, and really desired for me to use my gifts. But I've just, in the past, if we go kind of down leadership roles, it's been limited.
Yeah.
And I even remember I went to a Christian college for my undergraduate, and I ran for student body president, and I won. I was student body president my senior year, but it was a huge deal. I was the first girl to ever be elected student body president. And, and I just felt like, glass ceiling kind of thing, because it was the very first female to ever have that role. But, and even then there were some men, like boys and men or whatever within the campus that had an issue with that, that I would step out and run, and then of all things be elected. And, so there was some pushback even in that time for me for that. And that wasn't necessarily obviously a church role, but that was a role in a Christian community, being a Christian college, that I ran up against people saying some things to me and my family, saying some things to my family. And, so that goes to the whole leadership side of things. But as a single person, I would just say again, like in our conversation, to just have that conversation within a church about how it's talked about from the pastor down, and then again how women and men are talking to one another, because I don't think that it's always mean-spirited by any means, but it is not necessarily constructive, and it can be quite hurtful. And I think people need just to be made aware of that, and they can be more mindful of how they're speaking and what they're saying and how they're loving each other.
Yeah.
In the church.
So when I was, it's a common thing that whenever I would hang out with, or like at a party, talk with a girl of an approximate age to me, no one would ever have a conversation with me, but someone would always have a conversation with the girl.
Yeah.
Lisanne, can you speak to that? That people talk to the girl about whether there's something going on.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because anytime you speak to anybody that's roughly around your age and you're both single, whoa. Like, what's going on there? And, hey, I saw you talking to so-and-so. So, I mean, this is, yes. I mean, we girls, I mean, I'll lump myself into, we can talk a good talk and everything. But this sort of thing, you're just like, are you serious? Like, I can't have a conversation like with another human being, and it's without assumptions or, being made. But it goes to, like they're anxious for you to get married because that's, what you should do.
Right.
I mean, it's not to say, I sit here, I say this, and I do desire that. I hope for that in the future, but I want to be seen and valued where I am now, because I think that I don't want to, I don't want to rush this time. It could be forever, who knows? But if it's not, I don't want to rush this time in my life to be not used with this freedom, this gift of freedom of time. And so, you know, I want to be used in the body. I want to be used with my friends who are mothers and married, and my family, because I do have a lot more time and than a lot of them do. And so I don't want to squander it, and be, you know, I want to be used to the fullest of what I've been made to do.
Do you think there's a fear of single women and their availability and their power that they're going to usurp and steal authority or steal opportunities from men? As if to say, opportunities for doing good in the world are limited. There's a small capital of them, and women are too much competition.
I don't know. I mean, I would. Men are afraid of us.
I'm freaking out right now. I'm like trembling next to you, like very uncomfortable.
No, I don't know. I mean, maybe there are people that feel that. I wouldn't, you know, I couldn't say no that I don't know. Maybe. I do think that there is, like I said, kind of going back to, and there is an idea sometimes of single women in leadership, or in positions of some type of leadership in the church, sometimes, or seeking it, I should say, can be viewed as aggressive and not feminine.
Okay.
And so, you know, there could, you know, that could play into a little bit of what you're saying. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, if people are fearful that I would take a job, you know, so to speak, from a man, I don't know. I mean, that goes back to, I think, I trust that the Lord puts me where he needs me, and there isn't somebody else that's right for that position, and that I'm meant, you know, like he's putting me there because he needs my skill set. He needs what I have to do this part of ministry or church or whatever. And that means that I am supposed to be there and a man is not.
Right.
But so that would probably obviously go into somebody's view of, you know, God's hand in how he works and moves and places people and opens and closes doors and things like that. I would hope that no one felt that way, but maybe.
So I think many of our viewers will be really interested in the fact that Downton Hope is a church which does not believe that women can or should be ordained as elders or pastors, and yet your experience there was not one of oppression. And for many of our listeners and viewers, that might actually be a mind-blowing thought and a mind-blowing concept. Can you talk a little bit about any kind of thoughts you might have on this idea?
Yeah, I mean, I can say one thing to start is that I have never felt led to even seek teaching in a pastoral way. That has never been something I have felt at all called to. So I've never sought it. And so that might, someone, you know, a woman that feels more impassioned about that, or feels that maybe that is more of her gift set, then she might feel differently than I have in my experience. Because it's not something I've even sought.
Okay.
But, you know, and I'm still doing, you know, a lot of thinking about some of those issues of women in leadership and in those roles in particular, like a pastoral and elder role within a church, and where does that fit? I mean, because right now, like, obviously women are more like usually relegated to a deaconess,
right?
You know, the title that they would get. But in terms of those higher positions within a church structure, I haven't sought them.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that we're talking about that specifically, because Ian, I think I might have even mentioned this in the previous podcast, but growing up for me, it was never even a question about. We never even had these conversations about like a woman's role within the church or gender specific roles, because it was always men that were pastors. It was always men that preached, and there was always men that were on the deacon board and the trustee board. And it was always that. So I went to Bible college young, had no concept of this, never even came up as a question. But, Bible colleges and seminaries typically have themes. It's pretty much every 5 to 10 years, they have certain things that they like address, right? The president of my Bible college was the first African-American evangelical seminary president. So he was absolutely a dynamic leader. I felt like, but he had a woman come and speak at chapel, and what he did was, I didn't even understand this at times. I remember standing in the back because I was helping run that chapel service, and he got up, he introduced her, and he read the passage that she was going to speak on. And this isn't a chapel, this isn't a church even. So she spoke, and all of a sudden I started to see people get up and leave, and I saw about 10 people that I knew that were Bible college and seminary students that got up and left the chapel at the same time. And I was like, there's no classes going on. Like, why are they leaving? And so it sparked this massive controversy that lasted for about 6 or 7 years about a woman's role, even in terms of teaching. And there was so much backlash to this person teaching that actually I didn't even know this, but up to that point, they would not allow women in the homiletics classes, in the classes that teach you how to preach.
Wow.
And because they were like, we don't believe this. And so I remember this firestorm of controversy started. And like people like got up and left and like met with the president, like talked with him about passages of scripture and got into all these details.
Yeah.
It was that impassioned that people would get up and leave in the middle of a chapel service. And again, we actually, after that point, opened up the homiletics classes to women and started to allow women in the leadership programs, which we had not allowed before. How nuts is that? Like, but it was so, in my context growing up, it was so ingrained that it was not even questioned.
Tell them what year it was.
This was in 2007.
Wow.
That this happened.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that women have a lot to give to ministry and to teaching, for that matter. I think that, I've heard many women who are amazing speakers. They're great of intellects. And they have something to say, and it's worth listening to. So, I know I have no issue at all with a female being a teacher. And like I said, I'm still praying through and working through my own thoughts on some of the like more of a pastoral ordained position in the church, and then also the eldership and so forth. But I'm of a much stronger mindset that women have, and I think that the church is meant to have more of an equal partnership of man and woman in the church, which includes leadership of the church. And that you would see even examples throughout scripture of that happening, that there's a man and a woman leading and doing ministry together. And so I definitely fall a lot more on that side of things. And again, I haven't sought those positions. So in terms of just my own personal experiences about it, I don't really have them.
Okay.
But the leadership questions, that's like a whole nother, I think we were talking, it's like, that's a huge topic in its own that would be worth you all exploring on another podcast for sure. Because I think there's a lot there.
Yeah. So what are some of the things the lessons that should be learned from your experience and the experiences of others in terms of making it easier for women to serve and minister in their local churches?
I think that there needs to be mean, first and foremost, it's going to have to be a bit of a mindset change in some churches, which is going to have to happen from the kind of top down, so to speak. So I think a pastor is going to have to take some of that as somebody who's, the authority that's teaching in that church. But I think, so that open-mindedness of the sense that that women, we have such a different way of processing, of leading, and that is of value. And I think that and that can actually enhance ministry if they are put in charge of a leadership of a ministry within the church or something of that nature. So I would like to see people having more conversation of even just talking with somebody if they because I remember, one of the ministries that I ended up working with Joey on, of course, as is Love One, and he just called me several years ago, and he said, "Lisanne, there's this idea that I've had, and I just I need somebody who can take it, who can lead it, and develop the vision for it. And you came to mind, and then some other people recommended you, and I just want to talk to you about it. I want you to pray about it." And he just said, "Take it, go. Like, here is this vision, and you build it. You design it. You help it to shape." And it was amazing, to be entrusted with something like that, and to be told that he deferred to me.
Right.
So, he valued what I had to say. He actually listened when I spoke, and those sorts of things, and not half listened and half ready to move to the next thing.
Right.
Get from some people, but actually engage and ask legitimate questions, but give some authority. And I think if churches even just gave a little bit of leadership to start, if they're a church that's on that fence or just kind of starting to really think about these issues, that if they just started even small, they would see some great movement among the women in their church, and great growth, I think, within ministry in their church. But my biggest thing is I think it has to start from the pastor down, because too many people sitting in those pews, that's where they're getting their ideas and what they believe. And if he is not teaching that, then it's not going to change. But
I sometimes feel like that maybe it's a battle that some pastors just don't want to fight. It's a lot easier to say, "Hey, I've got a whole host of competent people, so I'm going to pick certain people that won't cause controversy or issues." And then what happens is I think we have these huge gaps in our theology. I really think it's a theological problem. And so, not being intentional to say, no, we're going to shape something here where it's safe for all people with a leadership gift to exercise that and to lead. I think Joey's done a very good job of balancing that. But I think it takes some intentionality, and it also takes some element of risk as well.
It does. And it's hard. I do know my father's in ministry my whole life, and still is to this day. And so I respect and understand that it's a very difficult job. And I know sometimes, like, things, throughout the years, he had ideas about and wanted to see changed in a place. The older generation made that very difficult. Less so than the younger people in the church, because that was the way things were always done, and you don't change that. And this is why we do things the way we do. And if you don't like it, to the pastor, then you can leave. And so, that's a very difficult place that some people find themselves in. And so I do have sympathy and compassion towards, those kinds of positions that some leaders find themselves confronted with, and so that's where small changes is where it's going to have to happen. Specifically, it's like really start small and just start to change those things, and try to change, and keep teaching and keep talking about the values of women, of leadership, of those singleness, that's the beginnings of changing. But So I do understand that there are times it's hard, but again, my biggest thing is I feel like it just has to start from the pulpit.
Yeah.
And it starts with something as simple as the senior pastor, the senior leadership of the church, allowing a woman's voice to make the decision, and that being the decision that's stuck to.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I think, it's one thing to like ask input, which is great. It's good to, you should, I think husband and wives, like you guys have to talk about stuff, and there's great wisdom that a wife can give to her husband that he won't see. And so there's that, but I think also like sometimes, in leadership in church, it's like, okay, you said your piece. Thank you. Moving on.
Yeah. Yeah. And instead of that, it's okay, you make the final decision, and that's the decision we stick to, because that's the position you're in. If you're in a leadership position, then your word goes.
Mm-hmm.
And when the pastor is willing to do that, it sets a culture, it sets an expectation that that's how it is now.
Right. Because when he has your back about something and says, well, you know what, I did talk to Lisa Ann about this, and I did, I do think this, or whatever the case is, and he's got your back, that's a huge thing.
Yeah. Huge.
And so, that to me, as I said, was, one thing that the last, 5+ whatever, however long I've, was it in Annapolis, that I was so blessed with being there, because that was something that was taken seriously, and and it did make me feel like I was truly a valued member of that church, but also a valued member of the body of Christ, because it made me think, okay, I actually thank you, because I actually do have something to say, and hopefully that will help and contribute, and to be accepted in that way is a beautiful thing for my faith.
Right.
Right. And so, I would say, that's huge. Because like I said, it wasn't just that he asked me to like run something. Because again, that organizational thing, where it's like the woman can be the organizational person in a ministry. But he actually said, no, like you take it, you run with it, you lead, and I will defer to you. Huge. Huge.
And I was thinking too, as you were talking, Lisa Ann, just about this idea of, kind of tying it back in with marriage, right? Like, the most valuable picture of how the church should operate is it's compared to a marriage, right? And I was just thinking about how Rachel and I communicate. Like, Rachel is a very competent, qualified nurse. She knows more about health than I ever will know. All of our decisions for healthcare, for health, like I come to her, I'm like, what do I do here? I just listen to her. And I'm not a perfect model by any stretch of the imagination. But it's like, Rachel's got certain skill sets that I'm like, tell me what to do.
Right.
Like, she's a way better intuitor than I am. And sometimes I'll share communication with her. I'll share even text messages and things I'm sending to people that I'm in leadership with. And she's got such a unique perspective because she is who she is, so different than me, that I would be dumb. I'd just be dumb not to listen to her.
Right. And I actually think, that's how a lot of, my parents, 45 years in August, they've been married, and they would say the same thing. My dad's like, hey, your mom and I talk, and sometimes she's got the right answer, and I would be stupid not to listen to her.
Yep.
And God gave her to me to help me.
Yeah.
So why would I not listen to what God has given me, to be, a help and somebody, to lean on. You're leaning on one another. So I think that women have a great deal to give. And it's not just
to bake pies. Not that that's bad.
Which is exactly, there's women that's what they love to do, and God bless them. Like, thank you. And I like to bake pies, but it's like that's not where I always want to be.
Yeah.
So
funny thing. So tomorrow, we aligned ourselves with a church plant in Nashville in this transitional season, and tomorrow the pastor's wife is preaching the sermon.
Wow!
And I'm actually like really excited to hear what she has to say.
Yeah.
I was gonna stage a coup, and then I thought, maybe not. Maybe not now. Maybe
not
later.
After this conversation.
This conversation, I think, is really relevant with the conversation about single people in the church, in terms of affording them dignity in what they have to contribute. And that's easily accomplished with that simple willingness for the white male married leadership to take seriously and listen to single people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're just as much a part of the body as they are.
Right.
So that means that, again, we're all uniquely created and given gifts. And so we actually might have something to say that's of value, and to discount that. Or again, to go back to saying, like, we're not really whole yet. Like, yes, we're here, but we need to find you a husband or a wife or whatever. It's not helpful.
Yeah.
And it's not biblical. I mean, it's not like.
Well, and I was thinking too, it goes back to like the image of God, like the Imago Dei, right? Like, if we believe that somehow, some way, somebody's deficient because of some external thing, I think what we're denying there is the fact that Jesus saves the whole person, and Jesus redeems the whole person to be used for his purposes in the world, right? And to usher in his kingdom. And so, like, if that's the case, then deficiency because of a position in our life, then I think it denies that beauty that, no, Christ comes in and saves the whole person and redeems singleness, redeems sexuality, redeems gender, redeems all those things to spread his good news across the world that, yeah, he can do this for you too.
Right.
And so maybe we're missing a piece of this idea of God's redemption and what Christ did for us when we say, well, you're deficient, so you need some additional things from what you already have. And so it might even be somewhat of a Christological, soteriological thing that says, like, no, we're saved, and God is saving and redeeming every aspect of me to be used for his glory, including the fact of my position in life, whether that's single, married, widowed, divorced, any of those things.
Right. And because ultimately, I mean, God wants every single one of us, and he wants a deep personal relationship with every single one of us. And so regardless of your marital status, each individual person is still having a one-to-one relationship with God. And that's what he wants. And so, that's what we should each all be seeking, no matter what your marital status is. And it's interesting. I mean, some of the things you read on this topic is, the point also, marriage is also temporary, because we're married here. We are not married in heaven. And so, I mean, marriage is actually a very temporary stage of life. So just to make it feel that that's the end all, that's what it is. Wow, you're asking me to make something temporary my end all, when my all in all is to know God and to seek God. So I think we should all be doing that.
That's a wonderful point. That's wonderful. Well, yes, preach, Lisa Ann. Come on, let's find you a pulpit and some people. Let's get it going.
Let's not be hasty now.
Thanks, Ian, for bringing us right back down.
That's what
so it seems through this conversation there's an aspect of the church's theology, from the pulpit or in the pews, which needs to change in terms of understanding that all people, regardless of their gender, sexuality, education, if they're a baptized member of Christ's church, then they have a worthy contribution to make to the church's purposes and mission.
Absolutely.
And that's the shift that needs to occur in order for, I think, single people to be considered worthy participants in the church, to have worthwhile roles of leadership, and all the rest of it. But we've identified that that's something that needs to change in the leadership of the church, particularly for it to filter down.
Yeah. When you think about this idea of leading the ship, like you talk about, it is a gift, like time. Like, who wouldn't want? I mean, in my mind, like, who would want a bunch of single people in your church? They're just going to drive it. Like, they're going to have the ideas. They're going to have the time, the energy, and the effort to drive a church. Like, goodness gracious, that sounds wonderful to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's got to be, an embracing of the single person, and then even a focus on discipling, too. I mean, the single person as well as the married person. I think one of the things that I always find interesting in a lot of churches is the women's Bible study, which will be at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. So it's like, okay, so that means that no working woman, which would include single women, can attend, and things like that. So there needs to be, and I definitely, going back to our very first part of the conversation, which was the singles groups, and it's like, no, I would not ever go to one. If there was an opportunity, at a church for that, I wouldn't go. I'm not interested in that type of environment. But to make sure that the opportunities that we do have for learning and growing and deepening our faith through discipleship is focused as well on single people, and not just a marriage class to learn better things about marriage, or a mom class to learn about being a better mother, for women. I think there needs to be a more whole perspective of the woman, and how they can grow closer to God, not just in a role.
So what can Josh and I do as church leaders to make this happen?
Well, I think, one of the things that I loved is my church in Australia. They just recently had a whole sermon dedicated to singleness, and I thought it was brilliant. And they basically broke down a lot of what the Bible talks about singleness, some of what we talked about here today, some of those points. And then they actually had a really great lady who came up and also spoke about communication. And so I just thought it was a really nice first step. And I'm not saying that has to be the case everywhere, but a nice first step to at least start a communication about how we speak, how we love, building a community. Because I think one of the things that Sally, who was a single woman that shared and spoke, she brought up, which I loved, because she's talking about, we are family, and to have churches have other families that have children or whatever, or married couples, welcoming single people into their homes, making them feel that they are actually a part of that family. And then as a single person as well, there are things that it's hard to do by yourself. And for instance, if your car breaks down on the side of the road, who do you call? And you don't have another person immediately, like a spouse, to call. So who do you call? Like making a church, a community that says, we are going to support you. If you need me to run out and help you change a flat tire, then you have people to call. Or your water heater breaks in your home, like you have someone to call. That we are giving those supports to the single community, I think, and showing that kind of love and embracing them as fully part of the church body is a beautiful thing. And I think that can be encouraged very strongly in churches today, of how we can serve one another. And it's not always just like the children's ministry of, like who can serve this Sunday, but it's like building up people to start thinking outside of even a Sunday morning, and how they can serve everyone in the church, and embrace and love and welcome in single people into their home. Because until now, I've never lived close to family. So for me, and of course you don't, Ian, either. And so it's like, your church, your community of friends and so forth is your family. So to know that you can depend and turn to them in times of need is humongous. So I would say that those are some really good things to be thinking about and talking about with your churches, with the leadership of your churches, of making sure that we're actually building a community that embraces all of the people. Because sometimes people get the impression that because you are single and therefore independent of other people necessarily, that you don't need anyone's help, that you've got this. And that's not true. It's not. We all need people. We're made to need people. So So again, to build a community that recognizes that and loves one another that well would be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I've got my cigar's done. I'm going to head out in a minute.
All right, so Ian, tell me, how's the Cuban for you, buddy? Am I seeing you get a little green?
Yeah, seriously, I actually got a little bit nauseous from that cigar. It's been a while.
I could totally tell. I was watching your face. I was like, "Yep, that's a Cuban right there."
Yeah, just a little stronger than anything else.
That's well, Lisa-Ann, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me,
We got to
guys.
make sure we have you back. So I think this is awesome. Do we have any? Ian, my phone died, so I wasn't able to check any of the other comments. Do you have any comments to address?
Let's see what comments we got. We got a comment from Emmy Smith, who talked about how men are very happy to listen to women teaching in contexts that aren't the church.
Huh.
Like Beth Moore, Elizabeth Elliott, Amy Orr Ewing from Ravi Zacharias Ministries. Men are quite happy to listen to that kind of teaching, exposing a certain hypocrisy, I suppose, in their expectations.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And Rachel Page Young commented,
as she sits right across.
Address that
"Church can overlook the fact that singleness can be God's plan in your life. No, surely not." And the idea of pressuring single people to get married, or judging them for not doing not really performing God's will, is a problem that needs to be overcome.
Yeah, well, that's good. How many live viewers do we have right now?
3 right now. Please say hi to us, comment on our Facebook page, or message us and say hi that you watched, and do give us any questions. We can address it at a future date.
Please send us comments. Affirm what we're doing. We're millennials. Hashtag millennials.
Hashtag millennials. Well, thanks very much for a great chat, everybody. And I'll see you when I'm back when I'm back stateside later this week.
All right.
All right.
See you
Have
guys.
fun.
Bye.
Peace out. Bye.
Bye.